The rain over London's Heathrow Airport did not fall in drops. It descended as a heavy, freezing sheets of grey that blurred the boundary between the tarmac and the sky. It was 9:00 p.m. Outside the massive glass walls of the private VIP departure lounge, the gargantuan silhouette of the Airbus A380, the flagship of Crown Airways, sat beneath the floodlights. Its metallic silver fuselage gleamed like a pristine, winged fortress, ready to ferry the world's most powerful people across the Atlantic to New York. Inside the terminal, the atmosphere was a quiet symphony of extreme wealth: white marble floors, soft leather armchairs, and the low clink of crystal glasses filled with vintage champagne. Walking along the edge of the velvet rope barrier, entirely out of place in this cathedral of luxury, was Elijah Vance and his 8-year-old daughter, Maya. Elijah was a 48-year-old black man who possessed the quiet, immovable posture of a mountain. His face was deeply weathered, marked by sharp, intelligent lines around his eyes, and his skin was a rich, dark mahogany. Tonight, he wore an ordinary, slightly oversized green canvas jacket and faded denim jeans that bore the subtle phrase of long-term wear. His shoes were simple, scuffed brown leather boots. To any casual observer, he looked like a tired, low-income immigrant laborer who had accidentally wandered into the wrong terminal. Beside him, little Maya walked with slow, delicate steps. She wore a simple white cotton dress, and her small arms were wrapped tightly around a faded, well-loved teddy bear with a missing button eye. Maya's face was beautiful, but dangerously pale, her breathing shallow. She had been battling a rare, aggressive respiratory condition for the past 2 years, and this flight to a specialized clinic in Manhattan was her only chance at survival. "Dad," Maya whispered, her small voice trembling as she looked at the glamorous, diamond-clad travelers gliding past them. "Everyone is looking at us. Are you sure our tickets are for this part of the plane? We can just sit in the back." "I don't mind the small seats." Elijah stopped, kneeling down on the polished marble. He completely ignored the cold, judgmental stares of the high society patrons around him. He reached out, his massive, heavy hands incredibly warm and gentle, as he tucked a stray curl of dark hair behind Maya's ear. When he looked at his daughter, the stern exhaustion on his face vanished, replaced by an amber gaze of profound, untouchable devotion. "Maya, look at your dad," Elijah said, his deep, resonant baritone grounding her fears instantly. "For 2 years, you've taken every treatment and every needle without crying once. I promised you that when we took this flight to get you better, you wouldn't have to suffer in a cramped seat. I used every single air mile credit and every dollar I had to secure this cabin. Walk with your head held high, baby girl. You belong in the light just as much as anyone else." What Elijah didn't tell his daughter was the real reason they held those golden tickets. 10 years ago, Elijah Vance was the legendary chief aerospace architect and the phantom billionaire founder of Vanguard Aviation, leasing the massive global conglomerate that actually owned the title deeds to 40% of the commercial aircraft operating in the Western Hemisphere. He was the man who had designed the very airframe they were about to board. But when Maya fell ill, Elijah walked completely away from the boardrooms, locking his sovereign executive credentials in an encrypted vault, choosing to live a quiet, invisible life to focus entirely on his daughter's care. To the airline, he had booked their seats under a simple, unlinked family alias. He stood up, his towering 6'3" frame straightening as he took Maya's small hand. Together, they walked down the glass jet bridge, stepping into the aircraft's upper deck, the ultra-exclusive first-class sanctuary known as the Sovereign Cloud. The cabin was a masterpiece of luxury. Each passenger possessed a private suite enclosed by polished walnut doors, complete with Italian leather reclining beds and personal minibars. As Elijah and Maya located their assigned suites at the front of the cabin, a sharp click of high heels echoed against the hardwood aisle. Elena Rostova, the chief purser of the flight, stepped into their path. She was a woman in her late 30s, dressed in the sharp navy blue silk uniform of the airline, her hair pulled back into a flawless, icy bun. She possessed the calculated ability to evaluate a passenger's social status before they even handed over their passport. When her eyes flicked down to Elijah's faded canvas jacket and Maya's tattered teddy bear, her professional smile instantly died. Her features hardened into a look of absolute, aristocratic disgust. "Can I help you?" Alina asked, her voice dropping into a freezing, clinical tone that acted as a physical barrier. She didn't look at Elijah's face. She looked at the scuffs on his boots. "The economy boarding doors are located on the lower deck. You have taken the wrong boarding bridge." "We are in the right place," Elijah said calmly, his voice steady and polite as he held out their two golden first-class boarding passes. Suites 1A and 1B, for Vance. Elena didn't take the passes. She merely glanced at them, a small, mocking sneer touching her red lips. Before she could speak, a tall man in a pristine, white captain's uniform with 4 gold stripes on his shoulders walked up behind her. It was Captain Julian Sterling, the chief pilot of the aircraft, a man known for his extreme arrogance and his high-profile connections to the airline's executive board. "What's the delay, Elena?" Captain Sterling demanded, his voice carrying a triton authority. Then his eyes fell on Elijah and the pale little girl. A heavy, judgmental scowl crossed his face. "Why are these people blocking the first-class aisle? The pre-flight checklist is active." "Captain," Elena said smoothly, her eyes gleaming with a malicious opportunity. "These passengers appear to have booked their suites through a third-party mileage glitch. And as you know, Isabella Vance, the international supermodel and your personal guest, just arrived at the gate. She requested a double suite for the transatlantic crossing, but we were fully booked." Captain Sterling looked at Elijah's faded jacket, then at Maya's cheap dress. A cold, dismissive smirk settled on his face. "Then the solution is simple," Captain Sterling said, leaning forward, his voice dripping with pure corporate arrogance. "Downgrade them. Transfer this man and his child to the last row of the economy section near the galleys. This cabin is reserved for people who reflect the prestige of Crown Airways. We don't fly laborers in the sovereign cloud. Move them out now, or I'll have airport security remove them for disrupting the flight." Maya's eyes welled with hot, terrified tears, her tiny fingers clutching Elijah's denim jeans as she shrank back into the shadows of the luxury cabin. The battle for a little girl's life and dignity had just collided with the ultimate wall of high society arrogance, and the sky was about to turn into a frozen cage. The hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit vibrated beneath the floorboards like a low, growling warning. Inside the enclosed luxury of the first-class cabin, the silence hung heavy, broken only by the soft, terrified sob escaping Maya's lips as she hid behind her father's leg. Elena Rostova, the chief purser, did not waste a single second. With a swift, practiced movement of her manicured fingers, she reached out and snatched the 2 golden boarding passes directly out of Elijah's hand. "The system has been updated," Elena announced, her voice ringing out with a cold, ringing finality that carried across the entire cabin. Several wealthy passengers in the adjacent suite slid their walnut doors open, peer-viewing the commotion with expressions of detached amusement. Elena tapped the digital screen of her handheld terminal, her face completely blank. "Your first-class seating allocation has been revoked due to an administrative inventory correction. You have been reassigned to seats 64E and 64F, row 64, at the very rear of the lower deck. Row 64 is directly adjacent to the main engine exhaust and the rear lavatories," Elijah said. He didn't raise his voice, but it dropped into a dangerous, baseline frequency, a resonant rumble that made the glass partitions on the suite walls vibrate faintly. He didn't flinch. He stood like an iron wall between the crew and his daughter. "My daughter has a severe respiratory condition. The air quality and the turbulence at the tail of an A380 during a transatlantic crossing will compromise her lungs. We hold fully verified, paid executive tier tickets." Captain Julian Sterling took a step closer, his 4 gold epaulets catching the white light of the cabin. He looked down at the scuffed leather of Elijah's boots, his expression hardening into a sneer of pure, institutional contempt. "Listen to me, traveler," Sterling whispered, leaning in so his words were a sharp, private blade meant only for Elijah. "I am the commander of this aircraft. My word is the law once these cabin doors seal." You used a corporate mileage loop to secure a piece of luxury you don't earn, and frankly, you are an eyesore to the demographic of this airline. Isabella Vance is currently waiting at the jet bridge door. Her presence in first class generates millions in public relations value. Yours generates nothing but a vacuum. Sterling flicked his wrist, gesturing toward the cockpit door where two large, uniformed male flight stewards stood waiting, their arms crossed, their expressions completely devoid of empathy. You have exactly two choices. Captain Sterling delivered the ultimatum with a cold, triumphant smirk. You take the girl, you walk down the stairs to the economy section, and you sit where you belong. Or, I call the British Airport Authority right now, have you dragged off this plane in handcuffs for refusing a crew directive, and leave you on the tarmac in the rain. Decide now. I have a schedule to keep. Behind the captain, a tall, striking woman clad in an expensive white fur coat and oversized dark sunglasses glided into the cabin, accompanied by a personal assistant carrying 3 luxury leather bags. It was Isabella Vance, the international supermodel. She didn't look at Elijah or Maya. She merely glanced at the open double suite 1A and 1B, waving a diamond-ringed hand toward Elena. Elena, darling, tell me the cabin is cleared. Isabella complained with an air of immense boredom. I can't stand the smell of the boarding terminal. And why is it so crowded in here? Right away, Miss Vance. Elena smiled warmly, her posture instantly shifting from an icy barrier into the fluid, submissive grace of a servant to the rich. She turned back to Elijah, her eyes snapping shut with absolute malice. Move your things, sir. Now. Maya's small hand trembled violently against Elijah's denim jeans. She looked up at her father, her pale face slicked with tears, her voice a tiny breaking whisper. Dad, please, let's just go to the back. I don't want them to lock you up. I can breathe fine. I promise. Let's just go. Elijah looked down at his daughter. The sight of her crying, the sight of a little girl being forced to apologize for existing in a space her father had literally built from the ground up, shattered the last remaining wall of his patience. The quiet, invisible laborer vanished. Slowly, Elijah reached into the inner pocket of his green canvas jacket. He did not pull out a wallet, nor did he pull out a passport. He pulled out a sleek, matte black encrypted titanium card, a device, devoid of any commercial airline branding, bearing only a single, laser-engraved serial code, Vanguardian 1. He didn't hand it to Elena. He didn't look at Captain Sterling. He walked past them both as if they were made of glass, stepping directly to the primary crew communication console mounted on the bulkhead wall. What do you think you're doing? Step away from the communications station. Captain Sterling roared, his face flushing deep crimson as he lunged forward to grab Elijah's shoulder. He never touched him. Elijah slotted the matte black titanium card into the emergency maintenance drive built into the underside of the console. Instantly, the entire first-class cabin gave a sudden, violent electrical shudder. The soft, ambient golden lighting blinked out, plunging the luxury upper deck into pitch darkness for one terrifying heartbeat. A loud, collective gasp echoed from the wealthy patrons in the suites. A millisecond later, the backup lights kicked in, but they didn't pulse with the warm, welcoming glow of Crown Airways. Instead, every single digital screen in the cockpit, every entertainment monitor in the suites, and every crew terminal across the entire double-deck aircraft flashed a blinding, crimson warning bar accompanied by a single line of high-level military-grade code. Critical external commandeer active. All local pilot commands suspended. Architect link online. The high-pitched wail of the emergency avionics override sliced through the dead silence of the first-class cabin. Captain Julian Sterling lunged toward the crew console, his manicured hands frantically tearing at the matte black titanium card Elijah had slotted into the bulkhead maintenance drive. But the moment his fingers brushed the metallic edge, a sharp, warning tone emitted from the speaker, and the screen flashed. Access denied. Immutable executive encryption protocol alpha 1. What did you do? Sterling screamed, turning on Elijah, his voice cracking into a panicked screech that completely shattered his aristocratic composure. "Miller, get this terrorist away from the avionics panel." The two towering flight stewards stepped forward, their faces pale, but determined as they reached for Elijah's green canvas jacket. Before their hands could close around the fabric, the heavy, reinforced cockpit door behind them clicked loudly. The electronic magnetic deadbolts, designed to withstand a military-grade assault, slid open automatically. The co-pilot ran out into the aisle, his headset hanging loosely around his neck, his face entirely devoid of color. "Captain," the co-pilot gasped, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped his flight tablet. "The entire fly-by-wire system, it's completely locked out. The flight management computers just rejected our pre-flight clearance." The digital glass cockpit has gone entirely black, flashing a sovereign corporate override from the legal title holder. Elena Rostova stood frozen, her handheld terminal vibrating in her grip as the passenger registry erased itself, replacing the names of international dignitaries and supermodels with a single, massive corporate title: Property of Vanguard Aviation Leasing Corp. Contract suspended. Isabella Vance, the supermodel, took a step back, her expensive white fur coat slipping off her shoulder as she stared at the flashing crimson monitors in utter bewilderment. "Julian, what is happening? Why are the screens flashing like that? Tell them to turn it off." Elijah did not answer them. He stood completely still, his towering 6'3" frame casting a massive, unyielding shadow across the cabin. Slowly, he reached up to the crew microphone, unhooking it from the cradle. He didn't look like a tired, low-income laborer anymore. His amber eyes narrowed into two freezing points of absolute authority. "Julian," Elijah spoke into the microphone, his deep, resonant baritone booming not just through the first-class speakers, but echoing down the stairs, filling the entire lower-deck economy cabins, the galleys, and the cargo bays. 10 years ago, I drafted the blueprints for the composite carbon fiber wings of this exact Airbus A380. I engineered the digital fly-by-wire override system to ensure that no rogue pilot could ever compromise the safety of my vessels. You told my daughter she doesn't belong in the light because of the canvas of my coat and the scuffs on my boots." Elijah turned his head slowly, his piercing gaze locking onto Captain Sterling with the absolute weight of a king passing judgment on a peasant. "You are not the law on this aircraft, Julian. You are a driver, and you just attempted to evict the man who owns the car." Sterling felt the blood completely freeze in his veins. His jaw hung open, his eyes wide and vacant as his brain desperately tried to process the impossible truth. Vanguard Aviation Leasing, the multi-billion-dollar global giant that owned the title deeds to their entire fleet. Crown Airways didn't own this plane. They leased it on a month-to-month margin, and the man standing in front of him, dressed in scratchy denim and a faded jacket, was the phantom sovereign who signed their operating certificates. Elijah tapped the glass surface of the terminal, entering a 12-digit numeric master key from his memory. "Julian," Elijah commanded into the microphone, his tone carrying an icy finality. "Open a direct satellite relay to the Crown Airways Executive Boardroom in London. Tell the Chief Executive Officer that the Chairman of Vanguard is currently standing in the upper deck of Flight 1001, and I am about to tear up their lease." The silence inside the cabin was no longer clinical. It was the suffocating, absolute quiet of a vacuum. On the center console monitor, the crimson warning bars suddenly dissolved. The screen flickered twice, replacing the lines of encrypted source code with a high-definition, live satellite video feed. The camera focused on a mahogany boardroom in London, where Sir Reginald Thorne, the Chief Executive Officer of Crown Airways, sat alongside his entire executive committee. Thorne wasn't sitting calmly. He was leaning so far forward his chest almost touched the camera lens, his expensive silk tie disheveled, his face entirely devoid of color. "Dr. Vance," Thorne gasped into the live audio relay, his voice cracking with a high-pitched, breathless terror that echoed through every speaker on the double-deck aircraft. "Chairman Vance, please, we did not receive any protocol notification that you were inspecting a transatlantic flight tonight. The corporate system, the automated leasing matrix. Oh God, please forgive us, sir. Captain Julian Sterling felt his knees turn to pure water. He stumbled backward against the walnut door of Suite 1A, his hand catching the edge of the frame to keep his body from collapsing onto the floor. Dr. Vance, the phantom architect, the absolute ruler of global aviation logistics. R. Reginald, Sterling stammered, his voice trembling as he looked at the screen. Sir, there's been a massive misunderstanding. The passenger, this man didn't present his executive credentials at the gate. He was dressed like a... Shut your mouth, Julian. Thorne roared through the satellite link, his fist slamming hard against the boardroom table in London. You arrogant, incompetent fool. You didn't just insult a passenger, you just insulted the sole majority shareholder of our entire operational fleet. Vanguard Leasing holds the asset titles to every single aircraft we fly. If Dr. Vance tears up our lease agreement tonight, Crown Airways will be declared bankrupt by tomorrow morning. Elena Rostova stood paralyzed, her fingers frozen over her digital terminal. The supermodel, Isabella Vance, silently took 3 steps back into the shadows of the entry galley, her assistant dropping the luxury leather bags, as they realized they were looking at the man who literally owned the sky beneath their feet. Elijah did not look at the monitor. His expression remained as still and cold as granite. He slowly knelt down, his massive, calloused hand reaching out to gently wipe the dry tear tracks from Maya's pale cheeks. He lifted her chin, ensuring she looked at the entire cabin with her head held high. Reginald, Elijah spoke into the crew microphone, his deep baritone cutting through the cabin like a blade. Your chief pilot told my daughter that she doesn't belong in the sovereign cloud. He told her that luxury is reserved for people who reflect a specific social profile. If your corporate culture allows a dying child to be downgraded to the engine exhaust to accommodate a public relations asset, then your airline doesn't deserve my wings. Dr. Vance, please. I beg of you, Thorne cried out, his hands clasped together on the live video feed. Name your terms. Anything. Immediate structural liquidation of the regional management. Just do not ground the fleet. Initiate the following compliance protocol, Elijah commanded, his amber eyes locking onto Captain Sterling with a chilling finality. Effective this exact second, Julian Sterling is permanently stripped of his command seniority. Revoke his flight credentials and blacklist his commercial license from every international registry under Vanguard control. He will never sit in a cockpit again. Consider it done, Thorne shouted. He is terminated immediately. Elijah turned his gaze to Elena. Sa taitiep vien truong Elena Rostova. She is barred from entering any Vanguard-owned corporate facility worldwide. And do not let her collect her uniform coat. Remove them both from my aircraft. Before the chief purser could even open her mouth to beg, the 2 large flight stewards who had been ordered minutes ago to evict Elijah stepped forward with absolute, robotic efficiency. Moving with sudden, brutal professionalism, they grabbed Captain Sterling by the gold epaulets of his pristine white uniform and took Elena by the arms. They dragged the weeping, ruined crew members down the glass jet bridge, throwing them out into the freezing London rain in full, humiliating view of the airport ground staff. Elijah turned back to the co-pilot, who stood trembling by the cockpit door. Command the helipad logistics at JFK. Have an advanced life support ambulance waiting on the tarmac the moment we touch down. And get this aircraft in the air. My daughter has an appointment in New York. Right away, Chairman. Immediately, the co-pilot yelled, sprinting back into the cockpit to initialize the master systems. The standard cabin lights flicked back on, glowing with a warm, brilliant amber light. Elijah walked back to Maya, his rugged features softening instantly as he offered his thick, rough elbow to her with the courtly grace of a true king. Our suite is ready, Princess, Elijah murmured, his voice filling with a deep, proud warmth. Shall we fly? Maya let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for an eternity, a brilliant, blinding smile wiping away every single trace of her exhaustion. She wrapped her small hand tightly around her father's muscular arm, her chin lifted high, her tattered teddy bear clutched proudly against her chest. Together, the mechanic-clothed billionaire and his daughter stepped into the most exclusive double suite in the sky. The wealthy patrons in the surrounding suites sat in absolute, breathless silence, watching them pass with a profound level of respect and awe. As the massive Airbus A380 roared down the Heathrow runway, lifting its iron wings flawlessly into the silver clouds, Maya looked out the window at the city lights disappearing below. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, her eyes shining like stars against the glass. "You really do own the sky." Elijah smiled, his heavy hand gently squeezing hers. He had proven to his daughter, and to the arrogant structure of high society, that true dignity could never be grounded by corporate pride. The master architect had secured the sky, the course was set, and the father had